Thank you, Rivka, for inviting me here. I think I will be the only one here today, and maybe also yesterday, I'm almost sure, to open the Russian page in the intellectual career of Rivka Feldhay. Indeed, in the beginning of 2000, Rivka has established here at Leer Jerusalem Institute a group of intellectual debate that later became a research project titled the Russian Forum, a group of people who came to think and discuss Russian presence in Israel from a perspective of cultural knowledge, different concepts of culture, and their cross-generational encounter. This approach was quite novel and even pioneering at the time, and I've joined the group in 2005 and worked with Rivka co-directing the project activities, including international workshops and conferences, and publishing a truly remarkable collected volume, Russians in Israel, The Pragmatics of Culture in Migration. This book introduced then a strong program, not in sociology of scientific knowledge, but a strong program for research and understanding of Russian cultural presence in Israel as a process of cultural translation. And I'm really thankful and grateful for Rivka and for you for this opportunity to present some thoughts on this issue. Here today I shall present a version of an essay, of publicistic essay, that I was invited to contribute to the special issue of the French journal Moyen-Orient that was just last month was published, and it was dedicated to the renewed or revival of the Russian presence in the Middle East. And I was very happy to hear that clever editors of this journal, of this magazine, considered the Russian-speaking Israelis to be part of the coverage of the Russian in the Middle East, and now I'll try to show you why. And as I come from sociology and first of all anthropology, my presentation will be of quite a different style. And I'll start with my mother. I really prefer to sit, but I'll try to. My mother, a sharp-eyed senior who immigrated from St. Petersburg to Israel just several years ago, recently offered me the following observation. Soon, she said, Israelis will become a unique case of reverse assimilation. Israelis will become like us. They turn into Russians. As a scholar of migration, I was quite skeptical about this prediction, but also suspected some truth in it. After all, a recent book on ex-Soviet immigrants in Israel that was jointly written by a senior Israeli journalist and a Russian-speaking politician was titled "The Million That Changed the Middle East." Israeli society indeed has been influenced by the arrival of such a massive number of immigrants to a country with a population of something like 5 million at that time, at the 90s. And here I will consider the cultural presence of Russian ex-Soviets in Israel, both on the heels of the collapse of the Soviet Union and today. The huge wave of immigration in the 1990s, followed by a smaller stream that continues today, brought about 1 million immigrants to Israel from the former Soviet Union. This highly heterogeneous collective was welcomed in Israel in accordance with the law of return and was considered by the state to be a mass Jewish homecoming to its historical homeland. Less formally, Israel encouraged and welcomed this immigration because of its potential contribution to the demographic wars taking place within the Israeli space. These conflicts included those between Jews and Arabs, Ashkenazim and Mizrahim, Jews of European origin and Jews of Oriental origin, and also secular and religious Jewish Israelis. The Russian cultural presence seemed to be evident to all. Russian-speaking immigrants, a largest ethno-linguistic group from a single country of origin in Israel, comprising 12% of the population. Besides their demographic significance, Russian-speaking immigrants in Israel also show a particular pattern of integration. They adapt the major Israeli ethos and national values, but keep their cultural particularities, especially the Russian language, Russian cultural institutions, and educational activities. Notable among the numerous manifestations of the quest for kind of a cultural autonomy in Israel, sometimes called in Israeli public discourse the Russian ghetto, is Russian and bilingual theaters, and the best known among these is the Gesher, the bridge theater in Jaffa. Another one is the establishing of the Mofet, excellence network of Russian language schools, which operates in most Israeli cities. Finally, there is the most unprecedented phenomenon of Russian media in Israel, or media for Russian speakers produced by ex-Soviets themselves. One might have predicted that the desire for cultural preservation would come to an end after one generation. The children of Russian speakers who were already socialized within the Israeli educational system, served in the Israeli army, and whose native language was Hebrew, would not have a need for Russian language cultural institutions and would abandon the Russian and especially the Soviet cultural baggage. Apparently, the opposite took place. Led by the informal activist social organization, the 1.5 generation they call themselves, young Russian Israelis promote a revival of a Russian Soviet identity in Israel and even try to extend it to the broader Israeli society through various educational and artistic activities. During the last year, this group launched the project Israeli Novi God, the Israeli New Year, aiming to teach Israelis about the most important secular Soviet holiday celebrated by ex-Soviets on the December 31. The project mobilized such a support that Israeli officials and politicians of the highest level opened the 2016 Novi God celebrations on the Russian Israeli TV channel and saluted the Russian immigrants in their broken Russian. This group also initiated a Russian-Israeli cookbook project, quickly collecting more than 150,000 shekels for publishing this book. The 1.5 generation epitomizes the new generation of Russians in Israel. They mastered the social media. Their language is Hebrew and not Russian. Many of them have never been in Russia, yet they see the Russian Soviet heritage as a cultural resource for their personal cultural identity and self-presentation. This less predictable claim for cultural particularity, however, seems to be a determining factor in integration of Russian immigrants into their new social environment. Russians have permitted each and every occupational, geographic, and social sector of Israeli society, even the fact that I'm standing here. An incredible polyphony of voices, lifestyles, political and ideological positions can be heard among Russian immigrants in Israel. While the majority of them retain mainstream right-wing attitudes, Russian-speaking Israelis actually take different political positions, ranging from the radical right to the radical left. They are the main customers for the non-kosher food in Israel, but they also form a majority of participants in the Jewish religious conversion classes. They are visible amongst Jewish religious settlers living in the occupied territories, but also comprise newly invented Christian religious communities. Russians are seen in various New Age groups, ecological and spiritual social movements, and artistic cultural milieu. The Time Out Tel Aviv magazine dedicated a special issue just last February to the influence of the Russian presence on Tel Aviv's artistic, musical, entertainment, and culinary life. Are we indeed, echoing my mother, witnessing a sort of Russification of Israel? Not necessarily. Alongside with the celebration of this Russian-Soviet revival, some very important and crucial features of the Russian-Soviet Jewish identity and lifestyle have changed dramatically in Israel. First and foremost, Russians in Israel become religious. Raised as Soviet citizens, new immigrants of Jewish and non-Jewish origin, prior to their immigration, held secular worldviews very close to 100%. They declared themselves as being non-religious at their arrival to the Holy Land. And they were unfamiliar with communal forms of religion expression. During the Soviet era, Jews defined their Jewishness mostly in ethnic terms. Their affiliation with the Jewish religion was not seen as a formative for their collective and personal identities. For example, the existence of two different terms in Russian for the expression of ethnic Jewish identity on the one hand and the Jewish religious affiliation on the other, Еврей and Иудей, illustrate the Soviet success in splitting Judaism into two distinct components, the religious and the ethnic one. 25 years after immigration, a rather different picture has emerged. However, relocating from the country of state socialism to the country of state Judaism, they have noticed, as some of them actually phrased it, and I quote, that the kippah, the skull cap, functions in Israel in a way similar to the Communist Party membership card in the Soviet Union. Surveys conducted in the past decade have shown that nearly 1/3 of Russian-speaking Israelis define themselves as religious, and only about the same number define themselves as non-believers, making even larger the percentage of Russian immigrants affiliated with some sort of faith. Another challenge and change in Russian Jewish identity is apparent too in educational attainment. The new generation of Russian-speaking immigrants in Israel consistently become less educated than their parents. The overlap between higher education and the Soviet Jewish identity is a well-studied phenomenon, because joining the educated strata was a dominant strategy of mobility, social and geographical, for the Jews as an ethnic minority group, both during the later stages of the Russian Empire and through the Soviet period. Thus, as the Soviet era ended in the early 90s, Russian-speaking immigrants who arrived to Israel carried high cultural and professional capital. Almost 60% of them had earned academic degrees, and two-thirds were employed in white-collar occupations prior immigration. 25 years later, the situation is quite different among their children. Some scholars even characterize this situation as a process of proletarization of Russian Soviet Jews that occurs exclusively in Israel. Only 30% of young Russian speakers in Israel are acquiring a higher education, a rate that is lower than average in similar generation of Israeli-born citizens. Moreover, the Russian immigrants in Israel neglect the traditional professions of Soviet Jewish intelligentsia, medicine, science, and arts, and turn to more pragmatic and technical choices. Hence, major influence that they are on the Israeli culture and political space, the million of Russian-speaking immigrants are also undergoing a crucial change as a group. I suggest explaining these dramatic changes taking place side by side with the revival of the Russian identity in Israel through the lens of post-Soviet condition and considering them as a post-Soviet presence in the Israeli Middle East. Ex-Soviet immigrants in Israel appear as a part of post-Soviet cultural space, as they can constitute a part of the transnational Russian-speaking socio-cultural diaspora maintained by physical contacts and the electronic media. Notably, this diasporic identity of Russian ex-Soviets in the Middle East is actively supported by Russian official discourse as well as Russian state programs addressing compatriots abroad. President Yeltsin and later Putin articulated a deep concern for 1 million Russians living in the Middle East in their statements during violent outbreaks of the last decades in the region. One of them famously said, "We shall not remain silent then Iraqi missiles are threatening 1 million of our compatriots." Needless to say that these missiles were produced in the Soviet Union. Indeed, in parallel with their ethno-national relocation in their new Jewish homeland, immigrants from the former Soviet Union continue to define themselves as Russians and express civic, political, and nationalist views that are typical of a post-Soviet attitude. Perhaps the most vivid manifestation of the post-Soviet political consciousness in Israel is the striking success of Avigdor Lieberman in the Israeli political scene. Lieberman, a politician of Soviet Russian origin, heads Israel Beiteinu, a party characterized by an authoritarian structure, nationalist outlook, and pseudo-pragmatic populist rhetoric. Lieberman has built his political career on the extremely broad support he received from the Russian-speaking collective in Israel. In the Israeli elections several years ago, fully 60% of Russian speakers voted for his party, securing for it 11 out of 15 seats in the Knesset. The Lieberman phenomenon can be understood as a continuing implementation of the logic of the Soviet national hierarchy translated by Russians into Israel, into the new Israeli context. In this view, Russian Jews are part of the Israeli majority with justified surplus rights. Arab Israelis, by contrast, are the second-class minority who should recognize themselves as such and make the best of it. The popularity of these views among Russian speakers in Israel should be understood in the context of the contemporary Russian post-Soviet nationalistic discourse and the rise of socio-political xenophobic policies and practices in the post-Soviet Russia towards different oppressed groups, including non-Russian immigrants in Russia, gay people, and political opposition. Thus, some scholars will consider the Russian-Israeli political vote as a vote for post-Soviet political consciousness. כמה זמן יש לי?
5 דקות.
Okay. Considering Russians in Israel as post-Soviet subjects also answers or helps to answer the question of how an alumni of the Soviet educational system could become a practicing Jew or a Christian in Israel. The Soviet cultural background made Russian immigrants highly ambivalent towards religiosity. Soviet ideology strove to create in human inspired by materialistic and scientific worldviews, but the dogmas and beliefs of Marxist-Leninist ideology operated rather like theological and eschatological religious systems. At the same time, the religious arenas existing at the margins of the Soviet society acquired political and cultural meaning as a private opposition to Soviet collectivistic values. Today, the wheel has turned in Russia too. I was told that in today's Moscow, to admit to your co-worker that you don't believe in God is just inappropriate. The massive post-Soviet religious awakening, which emerged from the late 80s as a supermarket of religions, is accompanied by a clear presence of new religious ideologies and movements that promote eclectic, universalistic, pseudoscientific, and therapeutic discourses. This inclusive and universalistic nature of post-Soviet religiosity is evident today in the religious beliefs and practices found in the most post-Soviet spaces, including in those in Israel. Just the two very short examples. The religious life of Russian evangelicals and Russian within the Christian messianic communities in Israel represent a remarkable instance of the transnational phenomenon of post-Soviet religious revival. The Russians who are predominate in these communities in Israel, in these communities and churches here, present an identity that combines not only Christianity and Judaism, but also universalism and nationalism. Ideologically, they live in a kind of Zionist Christianity, which holds simultaneously a belief in Jesus as a Messiah with Jewish theological motives. This is one of the churches that we studied in Jerusalem. With Jewish theological motives and a strict political position in support of the nationalist or right-wing camp in Israel. While anchored in Zion and the Jewish people, this messianic message has vivid universalistic aspirations, presenting the messianic communities as changing the world on behalf of humanity. This agenda fuses the Soviet cultural civil perceptions of universal collectivity and also the central role of the state with an evangelical ideology of active civil society and community and the Jewish Zionist idea of ancient holy motherland. Another very short example is the Kabbalah La'am movement, or Bnei Baruch movement, one of the new Kabbalah modern movement of Kabbalah studies, is another clear manifestation of post-Soviet religiosity in Israel and of Russian presence there. Established in 1997, this movement promotes the study of Kabbalah based on teaching of Rav Yehuda Ashlag, and led by Laitman, a close disciple of Rav Ashlag, that founded Kabbalah Le'am and serves its the only leader. Laitman himself immigrated from the Soviet Union, a scientist by education and professional training in the Soviet Union. He experienced in Israel a personal a religious turn and adopted a religious way of life. I'll short it a bit. The way the movement of Kabbalah Am recruits the Russian Soviet rhetoric and symbols to its messages signals a strong connection to the Russian Soviet cultural repertoire. While in terms of organizational pattern and style of public action, Kabbalah Le'am combines features of religious sect, a new social movement, and maybe autocratic ideological group, its rhetoric style is scientific and even based on a kind of materialistic worldview. The Kabbalah is not portrayed here as a part of the religious worldview and the lifestyle, but rather as a pure science. Similarly, as you can see here, Laitman's pedagogical style is based on the classic scientific Soviet teaching model. It is strongly informed by the scientification of Judaism, which is indeed one of the major strategies of connecting of post-Soviets to religion. To the bottom line. As the products of the post-Soviet transformation, Russian-speaking immigrants in Israel are post-Soviet subjects and share sociocultural tendencies of the post-Soviet condition. They are an ex-Soviet group making its way in a complex and paradoxical East-West European, Middle Eastern, Israeli culture and society. Thus, they clearly represent the Russian presence there, as well as post-Soviet cultural agenda, which sits well today with current nationalist, religious, and anti-liberal trends in Israel and in the broader Middle East. Thank you very much.